So imagine this. A single piece of health information lands in your family's lap, a genetic diagnosis. And suddenly, one person's result raises a ton of urgent questions for pretty much everyone they're related to. What happens when your personal health becomes a family matter? Well, let's explore the process designed to navigate this really complex situation.
Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to trace the journey of a genetic diagnosis, starting with its ripple effect. Then we'll get into the solution, which is called Cascade screening. We'll break down how risk is even calculated, understand the absolutely vital role of counseling, face some of the real-world challenges, and then finally, we'll look ahead to the future of family health. All right, let's start right at the heart of it all. That moment a relative, a parent, a sibling, maybe an aunt gets a diagnosis for a condition that runs in the family. It's one of those moments that really just changes everything.
Yeah, that single event doesn't just affect one person. No way. It creates this wave of uncertainty. Siblings start to wonder, am I at risk too? Parents worry about what they might have passed down, and kids are faced with these huge questions about their own future health. It's a heavy, heavy burden, and communication suddenly becomes the most critical first. So, how do we start to answer all these urgent questions? Well, it's definitely not about guesswork. There's a structured approach, one that's deeply rooted in clinical genetics, and it's designed specifically for this exact situation. It's called Cascade screening, and the name perfectly describes what happens. Information literally cascades from the first person diagnosed, they're called the proband or the starting point, out to their relatives in a really logical sequence, all based on how closely they're related. This whole process is especially crucial for what the CDC calls Tier 1 conditions. You can think of these as the big three of preventable hereditary diseases. We have clear, evidence-based actions we can take to seriously reduce their impact, which makes finding people early through Cascade screening an absolute game changer. And just look at the impact here. For a condition like Lynch syndrome, which really ups the risk for colorectal and other cancers, finding those at-risk relatives and getting them the right care can reduce overall mortality by a staggering 65%. That's not just a statistic. That's the life-saving potential of this process right there. So the potential is obviously huge. But how does it actually work in practice? How do we go from a sort of general family risk to a precise personal probability for every single person? Okay, let's get into the numbers. The key idea here is that we're no longer dealing with these broad, population-wide statistics. A diagnosis in your family is a powerful clue. It lets us refine the odds and calculate a much more accurate, personal risk for each and every relative. This is done using a statistical approach that's actually pretty intuitive when you break it down. We start with the prior risk, that's your baseline odds, your starting point. So, for example, a 50% chance of inheriting a specific gene from a parent. Then we add new information. Let's say another relative tests negative. That new fact lets us calculate the posterior risk, a much more accurate, updated probability just for you. Think of it like this. Hearing distant thunder gives you an initial chance of rain. That's your prior risk. But then a severe storm alert pops up on your phone. See? That's new information that dramatically modifies your risk, and you're definitely grabbing an umbrella. It's the exact same principle, just with genetics. But these probabilities and statistics, they're just one part of the story. I mean, the numbers are pretty meaningless without some translation. And that's where the art and science of genetic counseling become absolutely essential, helping people navigate the human side of all this genetic information. Genetic counseling really operates on two main models. You've got the teaching model, which is all about clearly explaining the science and the numbers. And then you have the psychosocial model, which focuses on helping people process the emotional weight of the information and just cope with the results. Now, what's really fascinating here is what happens in practice. When researchers looked into actual counseling sessions, they found 4 distinct patterns. And yeah, teaching is a big part of it, but look at that. The single largest category, at 33%, is supportive counseling. It's all about emotional support and facilitation. And here's why that really matters. Researchers found that clients reported being way more satisfied with counseling-focused approaches. That human connection, that feeling of support, turns out it's just as important as the data itself. Okay, so we have the science and we have the counseling, but how does this all play out in the real world? Because, getting this information to every single at-risk relative presents a whole new set of challenges. And the barriers are, well, they're numerous and complex.
They range from complicated family dynamics and just plain bad communication to really practical issues like cost and distance. And then there are the huge psychological hurdles, like anxiety and depression, that can stop people in their tracks. So, what's the best way to get over these roadblocks? The research is actually crystal clear. When trained providers, with the patient's permission of course, contact relatives directly, the number of people who actually get screened is significantly higher. This is such a critical takeaway. The common practice of just asking the patient to inform their whole family, it's often not the most effective way to go. I mean, it places a huge communication burden on someone who is also trying to process their own difficult diagnosis. All right, for our last section, let's zoom out and look at the big picture. What does all this mean for the future of health? Not just for one person, but for entire populations. Cascade screening is a perfect, real-world example of precision medicine in action. It's not about waiting for someone to get sick and then treating them. It's about using genetic information to proactively find people at high risk and connect them with preventive care that can dramatically improve their lives. And this leaves us with a really powerful final thought. In this age of personalized medicine, maybe sharing our genetic information is the most profound way we can care for our families. By understanding and talking about our shared blueprint, we can protect not only ourselves, but also the generations that are still to come.